The alarms did not build slowly. They tore through the platform in one single scream, and I was on my feet before my mind had caught up with my body. My name is Ethan Cole, and I was a communications officer on Border Platform 6, a lonely station at the edge of human territory, when the Kael'thir Dominion crossed the line that was never supposed to be crossed. I remember the exact second the lights on my console turned red. Not orange, not yellow, red. That color only meant one thing on this station, and every person who worked here had been trained never to hesitate when they saw it. "Confirmed hostile entry," said Grace Lindholm, my commanding officer, her voice flat and controlled, even as her hands moved fast across her controls. 17 capital ships, Kael'thir markings. They are not slowing down. I had heard stories about the Dominion since I was a boy. Every school on Earth taught us about the empires that ruled the stars long before humanity ever left its own solar system. The Kael'thir were one of the oldest and proudest of them, a species that had never lost a war in over 600 years. They did not ask. They did not warn. They simply took, and everyone who stood in their way disappeared from the history books. Now they were here, at the edge of our space, coming straight for a station with barely 300 people on it. "Options," Grace said, though I do not think she was really asking me. She already knew there was only one answer, but she wanted to hear someone else say it out loud, maybe to make it feel less impossible. "We signal command," I said. "That is the only option we have." She nodded once, and I opened every channel we had. My fingers were steady, which surprised me, because my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sent the distress call, the location, the enemy count, everything protocol demanded. Then I waited for a response that I expected would take hours, if it ever came at all. It took 11 seconds. 11 seconds for a return signal to reach us from Earth Defense Command, carrying a single line of text that I had never seen in any training manual, never heard mentioned in any briefing, never even imagined as a real possibility. "Authorization confirmed. Doctrine Silverline is now active. Hold your position. Help is already on its way." I read those words twice before I understood what they meant, and even then, I did not fully believe it. Doctrine Silverline was not something junior officers like me were ever told about. It was a name whispered in old stories among veterans who had served for decades, the kind of thing older soldiers mentioned late at night when they thought no one younger was listening. Some said it was a myth. Some said it was a warning, meant to scare recruits into taking their training seriously. I had always assumed it was nothing more than a rumor, a comforting bedtime story, that soldiers told each other to feel less alone out here on the edge of everything. I was wrong. Grace looked at her screen and went very still. For a woman who had commanded this station for 4 years without ever once raising her voice, that stillness frightened me more than the alarms had. "They are not slowing down," said Oliver Hart, our tactical officer, from across the room. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Impact in 6 minutes." 6 minutes. That was how long we had before 17 warships that had never lost a battle in 6 centuries would reach a station that could barely hold its own against a single pirate raider. I thought about my parents back on Earth, about my sister who was studying to become a doctor, about the letter I had never finished writing to a woman named Claire Doyle who I had met on my last leave and never had the courage to properly ask about seeing again. All of that raced through my mind in the space of a single breath. "Everyone to their stations," Grace said. "We hold as long as we can." I wanted to ask her what help is already on its way actually meant, because from where I stood, no help could possibly arrive in 6 minutes. Earth was weeks away, by any ship I had ever heard of. Even our fastest response cruisers needed at least 3 days to reach this sector. 6 minutes was nothing. 6 minutes was a joke. But something in the way Grace held herself told me she knew more than she was saying, and that whatever she knew, it was enough to keep her calm in the face of 17 ships that could erase our entire station without slowing down. The countdown on the main screen ticked lower. 5 minutes. I checked every system twice, sent every last piece of data we had gathered about the enemy fleet, and prepared myself for what I believed would be the last few minutes of my life. I was not brave about it. I want to be honest about that. My hands shook. My breathing was too fast. I was scared in a way I had never been scared before, and I think everyone else on that platform felt the exact same thing, even if none of us said it out loud. 4 minutes. Oliver's screen flickered, and he frowned at it, tapping the console as if it had simply glitched. "That is strange," he muttered. "I am reading a sensor distortion near their formation. Something is interfering with our scan." "Enemy countermeasures?" Grace asked. "No," Oliver said slowly, his frown deepening. "It is not coming from them. It is coming from somewhere else. Somewhere close to us." I looked at my own console, and for a moment I thought I saw it too. A strange shimmer, at the very edge of our sensor range, gone before I could focus on it properly. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of stress and fear, and turned back to my own duties. 3 minutes. The Kael'thir fleet was close enough now that I could see their ships without any magnification, dark shapes against the stars, moving with the confidence of something that had never once needed to be afraid. I thought about every story I had ever heard about this species, how other civilizations had begged for mercy and received none, how entire fleets, far larger than ours, had been destroyed without the Dominion losing a single ship in return. 2 minutes. Grace's communicator buzzed, a private channel, one that only she had access to. She answered it, listened for exactly 4 seconds, and then set it down with a strange look on her face. I could not tell if it was relief or disbelief, or both at once. "What was that?" I asked. "Command," she said quietly. "They just told me to look up." I did not understand what she meant until I actually did it, until I turned my eyes away from my console, and toward the viewport above us, toward the empty stretch of space that had been empty only moments before. It was not empty anymore. Ships were appearing, one after another, silent and enormous, unfolding out of what looked like nothing at all, as if the darkness itself had been hiding them the whole time. I counted 12 before I lost track, then 20, then more than I could keep count of at all. They were larger than anything I had ever seen in any human fleet, larger than anything I had ever seen described in any galactic registry, and they moved with a kind of calm precision that made my chest tighten with something that was not quite fear, and not quite hope, but somewhere strange in between. "Command," I said into my headset, my voice barely steady. We are seeing ships, a lot of ships. They were not there a moment ago." The response came back almost immediately, calm and quiet, from a voice I did not recognize. "We know. Hold your position. This will be over soon." I looked at Grace, and for the first time since the alarms had gone off, I saw something on her face that was not fear. It was certainty. The Kael'thir fleet must have seen them too, because their formation broke apart, ships scattering in different directions as if trying to decide whether to fight or flee. But it was already too late for either choice. The new ships moved with a speed and precision that made the enemy's centuries of victories look small and distant, like something from a history book that no longer applied to the present moment. I watched the 17 Kael'thir warships, ships that had never lost a single fight in 600 years, try to turn away from something they had never expected to face. They did not get the chance. 1 minute. The new fleet closed the distance in a way that defied everything I understood about space combat, everything I had studied and trained for, everything I thought I knew about the limits of what any ship could do. There was no long build-up, no slow approach, no careful maneuvering. There was simply presence, and then there was absence, as one by one, the Kael'thir ships vanished from our sensors. Not destroyed in the way I expected, with fire and wreckage scattering across the stars. They simply stopped existing on our screens, erased so cleanly and so quickly that I found myself blinking in confusion, certain that something must be wrong with our instruments. But nothing was wrong. The screens were correct. The battle, if it could even be called a battle, was already over. Grace let out a breath I did not realize she had been holding, and for the first time since the alarms first went off, the room fell completely silent. "Status report," she said finally, her voice quiet. "All hostile signatures gone," Oliver said, staring at his screen, as if he could not quite believe what he was reading. "All of them, in under a minute." I looked back up at the viewport, at the massive ships still holding their positions above us, silent and still, waiting for something none of us understood yet. They did not send any communication. They did not ask for thanks or acknowledgement. They simply remained there, calm and enormous, as if their appearance alone had already said everything that needed to be said. "Where did they come from?" I asked, though I do not think I expected anyone to answer me. Grace looked at the ships for a long moment before she spoke, and when she finally did, her voice carried a weight I had never heard from her before. "They came from decades of decisions none of us were ever told about," she said. "This is only the beginning, Ethan. I think the entire galaxy is about to learn something about us that we have kept quiet for a very long time." I did not know it yet, standing there in that control room with my hands still shaking and my heart still racing. But Grace was right. What had happened in those 6 minutes was not the end of anything. It was the very first moment of something far larger, something that would change the way every species in this part of the galaxy looked at humanity forever. And somewhere far beyond our small station, word of what had just happened here was already beginning to spread. News of what happened at Border Platform 6 did not stay contained for long. Within hours, reports were moving through every human outpost near the border, whispered from person to person, before any official statement was even released. I remember standing in the mess hall 2 days later, listening to Nathan Price, one of our engineers, argue with anyone who would listen that what we had seen could not possibly be real. "Ships do not just appear out of nowhere," he said, shaking his head as he stirred his food without eating any of it. "Someone would have known. Someone would have told us." "Someone did know," I said. "They just did not tell us." That was the part that unsettled me the most, more than the sudden appearance of the fleet, more than the disappearance of 17 Kael'thir warships in under a minute. It was the realization that our own government, our own military, had been keeping something this large a secret from its own people for what must have been decades. Grace called me into her office later that day, and I could tell from the look on her face that she had learned more than she was allowed to share with the rest of the crew. She waited until the door closed behind me before she spoke. "I received a full briefing this morning," she said. "Some of it I can tell you, some of it I cannot." "I am listening," I said. She took a slow breath before she began. "What we saw was not a rescue fleet built overnight, Ethan. It was built over 50 years. Ships constructed in secret facilities that were never registered with any galactic authority, crewed by people who volunteered for programs that did not officially exist. Every single person on those ships gave up their names, their records, their entire public identity, in exchange for being part of something they were told might never even be used." I sat down slowly, trying to absorb what she was telling me. 50 years, I repeated. Why would anyone build something like that and never use it? "Because using it would mean admitting it existed," Grace said. "And once other species knew we had it, they would either try to destroy it before it was ready, or they would force us into a conflict long before we intended to reveal it. So instead, our leaders chose patience. They built the fleet in silence, tested it in silence, and waited for a moment when hiding it would cost us more than revealing it. And that moment was us," I said quietly. "This station. Today." Grace nodded. Doctrine Silverline was never about waiting to become powerful. We already were. It was about waiting for the right moment to let the galaxy discover that fact on its own terms, rather than ours being forced by fear. Part of me felt a strange kind of pride, knowing my own people had been quietly preparing for exactly this kind of moment for longer than I had been alive. But another part of me felt a small chill, wondering what else might still be hidden, what other secrets our leaders had decided we were not ready to know. 3 days after the encounter, Earth Defense Command finally released a short statement to the wider galactic community. I read it over Oliver's shoulder as it scrolled across the news display in the common room, and I remember how carefully worded it was, how little it actually explained. Humanity possesses defensive capabilities beyond what has previously been disclosed. Any further aggression against human territory or its citizens will be met with an appropriate and decisive response. We do not seek conflict. We seek only to be left in peace. It was such a short message for something so enormous. No mention of how many ships existed. No mention of where they had been built or how long they had been ready. No explanation for the sudden appearance near our border, or the disappearance of an entire enemy fleet in under a minute. Just a calm, quiet warning, delivered without any need to raise its voice. I found out later, through channels that were not exactly official but were reliable enough, that the statement had been just as unsettling to other species as the fleet itself had been. Diplomats who had spent years quietly dismissing humanity as a minor, disorganized species, suddenly found themselves rereading old reports, wondering how much of what they thought they understood about us had actually been true. It was around this time that I met Vela Soren for the first time. She was a xenologist, attached to a neutral observation post near our sector, part of a species called the Farron, who had maintained careful and mostly peaceful relations with both humanity and the Kael'thir Dominion for over a century. She arrived at our station requesting information, though I suspected what she really wanted was simply to understand what had happened with her own eyes, rather than through second-hand reports. She was tall for her species, with pale gray skin and eyes that shifted slightly in color depending on the light, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone trained to observe, rather than to act. When Grace introduced us, Vela studied me for a long moment before speaking, as if she were trying to decide whether I was someone worth taking seriously. "You were here," she said, "when it happened." "I was," I said. "Then perhaps you can help me understand something that none of my own instruments can explain," she said. "My scanning equipment recorded no unusual energy signatures in this area for the 6 hours before the new ships appeared. No construction. No movement. No indication that anything was approaching. And yet, in less than 1 minute, dozens of vessels large enough to house thousands of crew members simply existed where nothing had existed before. I do not understand how that is possible." I remembered Oliver's words from that day, about the strange distortion he had noticed on our own sensors just before the fleet appeared, and I told her about it as carefully as I could, though I honestly did not understand it myself. "We do not fully understand it either," I admitted. "Whatever technology allowed those ships to remain hidden, it is beyond anything we were ever trained on. I only know that it worked." Vela was quiet for a long moment, and I could see something shifting behind her expression, something that looked almost like fear, though I could not be entirely certain, since I had never learned to read the subtle expressions of her species very well. "How long," she asked finally, "have you had this technology?" I did not have an answer for her, not one I was permitted to give, even if I had known it myself, and my silence seemed to tell her more than any words could have. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I suppose the question the rest of the galaxy is asking is not unreasonable. If your people were willing to hide something this significant for so long, what else might still be hidden?" I did not respond to that either, because I did not have an honest answer that would not sound either arrogant or frightening, and I did not want to be either of those things in front of her. Instead, I simply told her what little I could. "We did not build that fleet to conquer anyone," I said. "We built it because we were afraid of what would happen if we never did." Vela studied me for a long moment, before nodding slowly, as if she were filing my words away for later consideration, rather than accepting them outright. "Fear," she repeated softly. "That is often how the greatest changes in history begin." Over the following weeks, more details slowly emerged, some official, some rumor, some clearly exaggerated by people who wanted to make the story more dramatic than it already was. I heard that similar hidden fleets had appeared not just at our border, but at 2 other locations where Kael'thir forces had attempted incursions around the same time, both ending in the same swift and quiet manner as the one I had witnessed myself. I also heard, though I could never confirm it, that entire alien sensor networks across 3 separate systems had gone completely dark within the same 11 minutes that our own encounter had taken place, as if something had reached out and silenced every watching eye across a huge stretch of space all at once. Whether that detail was true or simply an exaggeration born from fear, I could not say for certain, but the timing lined up too closely with what I had personally witnessed for me to fully dismiss it. Grace received regular updates from command that she was allowed to share only in careful pieces, and each piece added another layer to the picture I was slowly building in my mind. The fleet, it seemed, had not simply appeared out of thin air by accident. It had been positioned, patiently and precisely, for years, waiting near key locations across our border, in complete silence, ready to respond the instant they were needed. "They were already here," Grace told me one evening, her voice quiet as she looked out toward the stars beyond the platform's viewport. "The whole time, watching, waiting, we just never knew it." I thought about that for a long time afterward, about how strange it was to imagine massive ships sitting silently nearby for years, hidden from every sensor we possessed, watching over us without our knowledge. Part of me found comfort in it, knowing we had never truly been as alone or as vulnerable as we believed, but another part of me could not shake a small, uneasy feeling, wondering what it meant that our own leaders had trusted a hidden fleet with our safety long before they ever trusted us with the truth. Vela returned to our station once more, before she left the sector, this time with a request, rather than a question. "My superiors wish to open formal communication with your government," she said. "They believe understanding humanity's true capabilities is now essential to maintaining peace in this region. They have asked me to request a meeting." I passed her request along to Grace, who forwarded it through the proper channels, and within a day, a response came back approving a formal diplomatic exchange to take place at a neutral station further along the border. I did not know it then, but that meeting would become one of the most important moments in the story that was still unfolding around all of us, one that would show the rest of the galaxy just how deeply unprepared they truly were for the version of humanity that had finally decided to stop hiding. As Vela prepared to leave, she paused at the airlock and turned back toward me one last time. "I hope, for all our sakes, that your people are as careful with this power as you claim to be," she said. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be fine, that humanity had no interest in using this newfound strength for anything beyond protecting what was already ours. But even as the words formed in my mind, I found myself uncertain whether I entirely believed them myself, not because I doubted my own people's intentions, but because I had just learned how much even I, someone who lived and worked right at the border, still did not know about what my own government was truly capable of. "We will do our best," I told her honestly, and it was the only answer I had. She nodded once, stepped through the airlock, and left our station behind, carrying with her the beginning of a message that would soon reach every corner of the galaxy that had ever doubted humanity's place among the stars. The neutral station where the meeting was scheduled to take place was called Meridian Junction, a massive trading hub built centuries ago by a coalition of smaller species who wanted a safe place to conduct business without fear of interference from any of the larger powers nearby. I had never been there before, and when Grace told me I would be joining the small human delegation as part of the communications team, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that I had not experienced since my very first assignment. "Why me?" I asked her, genuinely confused. "I am not a diplomat. I barely know the proper protocol for something like this." "Because you were there," Grace said simply. "You witnessed the encounter firsthand, and Command believes having someone who experienced it directly will help ground the conversation in reality, rather than rumor. Besides, I trust you." I did not feel entirely reassured by that, but I accepted the assignment anyway, and 3 days later, I found myself aboard a small transport ship heading toward Meridian Junction, alongside a handful of officials I barely knew, including a woman named Laura Bishop, a senior diplomat who had spent over a decade working with various alien governments before this entire situation began. Laura was calm, in a way that felt almost unnatural given the circumstances, sitting quietly with a small tablet in her lap, reviewing notes as if she were preparing for an ordinary trade negotiation, rather than what was quickly becoming the most significant diplomatic event in recent memory. "You seem very relaxed," I told her at one point, unable to hide my own nervousness. She looked up at me and smiled slightly. "I have spent years being underestimated in rooms full of people who assumed my species had nothing important to say. I imagine this meeting will feel very similar, except this time, we will be the ones with something worth listening to." When we arrived at Meridian Junction, the size of the place caught me off guard. A sprawling structure built from dozens of different architectural styles, stitched together over centuries, filled with representatives from species I had only ever read about in old academic reports. Word of our arrival had clearly spread ahead of us, because as our small group made our way through the central concourse toward the meeting chamber, I noticed dozens of eyes following us, some curious, some cautious, a few outright fearful. Vela met us just outside the chamber entrance, dressed in formal Farron attire that looked far more elaborate than anything I had seen her wear before. She greeted Grace and Laura with careful formality, before turning to me with a small, almost private nod of recognition. "I am glad you came," she said quietly. "The others will want to hear directly from someone who was actually present." The meeting chamber itself was larger than I expected, a circular room, with seating arranged around a central platform, allowing representatives from every species in attendance to see and be seen equally. I counted delegates from at least 8 different species scattered around the room. Some I recognized immediately. Others I had to quietly ask Laura about as we took our seats. There were representatives from the Farron, calm and measured like Vela herself. There were delegates from the Koran Assembly, a species known for their strict adherence to formal diplomatic procedure. There were even 2 representatives from smaller, less powerful species who had clearly been invited simply to observe rather than to actively participate, likely out of a desire to understand how this new development might affect the balance of power that had shaped the galaxy for centuries. Notably absent was any representative from the Kael'thir Dominion itself, though I noticed an empty seat clearly reserved for them near the front of the room, a silent reminder of the fleet that no longer existed and the questions still surrounding its disappearance. The meeting began with a formal greeting delivered by a Koran delegate named Doran Vex, whose voice carried the careful, practiced tone of someone accustomed to speaking in front of large and often tense gatherings. "We thank the human delegation for agreeing to this meeting," he said, his translated voice smooth and even. "Given recent events, the galactic community believes it is essential to better understand humanity's capabilities and intentions, both for the sake of regional stability and for the safety of all species who share this part of space." Laura rose slowly from her seat, and I watched her carefully, curious how she would handle a room full of representatives who had likely spent years quietly dismissing humanity as an unimportant, minor presence in galactic affairs. "We understand your concerns," she said calmly, "and we are willing to answer what questions we reasonably can. However, I want to be clear from the very beginning that humanity did not act with any intention of threatening this region's stability. We acted to defend our own people from an unprovoked attack, nothing more." A representative from the Koran Assembly, an older delegate with sharp, angular features, leaned forward slightly. "Unprovoked or not, the scale of your response has raised significant concern. Sensor readings from multiple systems indicate that entire fleets belonging to the Kael'thir Dominion were eliminated within minutes, with no warning given and no formal declaration made. Such actions are considered highly unusual under Galactic Convention." "Galactic Convention," Laura repeated evenly, "did not protect our border station from an unannounced attack either. We did not fire the first strike in this conflict, we simply ensured it would also be the last." A quiet murmur passed through parts of the room, and I could see several delegates exchanging glances, clearly uncertain how to respond to such a direct and unapologetic statement. I had expected Laura to soften her words, to offer some kind of careful diplomatic cushioning, but instead she spoke with a calm honesty that seemed to unsettle the room far more than aggression ever could have. Vela rose next, her voice steady despite the tension building around her. "I was present at the border shortly after the encounter took place," she said. "What I witnessed, and what I have since confirmed through independent sensor analysis, suggests that the human fleet responsible for this action was already positioned nearby for a significant period of time before the attack occurred, entirely undetected by any external monitoring system, including our own." This revelation seemed to land far harder than anything Laura had said, and I watched several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The idea that humanity possessed technology capable of hiding entire fleets from even the most sophisticated sensors in the galaxy was clearly far more unsettling to them than the fleet's destructive capabilities alone. "How long," Doran Vex asked carefully, "has this technology existed?" Laura paused for a long moment before answering, and I could tell she was choosing her next words with extreme care. "Longer than any of us in this room would likely be comfortable hearing," she said finally. "But I want to emphasize something important. Humanity has possessed this capability for decades, and in all that time, we have never once used it for conquest, expansion, or aggression against any species who did not first threaten us directly. Our intentions have not changed, simply because our capabilities are now visible." "And how are we meant to trust that claim?" another delegate asked, this one from a smaller, quieter species I did not recognize, "when you have spent decades hiding the very existence of this fleet from the rest of us?" It was a fair question, and I could see Laura considering it seriously, rather than dismissing it outright. "You are right to ask that," she said. "Trust is not something we expect to be given freely, simply because we say the right words in this room today. It is something that must be earned over time, through consistent action rather than promises. All we can offer you now is our word, backed by decades of restraint that most of you were never even aware of." The meeting continued for several more hours, moving through detailed questions about the scope of the fleet, the circumstances surrounding the attack, and the broader implications for regional security. I mostly remained quiet, speaking only when asked directly to confirm specific details about what I had personally witnessed at the border station, but I listened carefully to every exchange, absorbing the shifting tone of the room as the conversation progressed. What struck me most was not the fear in the room, though there was certainly plenty of that, but the underlying sense of recalculation happening behind nearly every delegate's eyes. These were representatives of species who had spent generations building their understanding of galactic power around certain fixed assumptions: humanity being small, humanity being new, humanity being manageable. Watching them slowly realize that one of those assumptions no longer held true was like watching an entire structure of belief quietly crumble in real time, replaced by something far more uncertain. During a brief recess, Vela approached me privately, near a viewport overlooking the vast trading concourse below. "You have been very quiet," she observed. "I am not used to rooms like this," I admitted. "Everyone here speaks so carefully, as if every word carries the weight of an entire species behind it." "In this room, it often does," she said. "But I noticed something interesting while you were answering questions earlier. You did not speak like someone trying to project strength or intimidate anyone in this room. You spoke like someone who was simply telling the truth, as clearly as you understood it." "That is because I was," I said. Vela studied me for a long moment, her expression difficult to read. "That may end up being humanity's greatest advantage in situations like this," she said finally. "Many species assume overwhelming strength must come, paired with equally overwhelming arrogance. Watching your people demonstrate one without the other seems to be causing more confusion in this room than the fleet itself did." I thought about her words carefully, realizing she might be right. Throughout the entire meeting, no human representative had boasted about the fleet's power, had threatened further action, or had demanded any kind of special treatment because of what had happened. We had simply explained what occurred, answered the questions we were able to answer honestly, and made clear that our only goal remained the safety of our own people. As the recess ended and delegates slowly returned to their seats, Doran Vex called the room back to order, with a formal announcement that seemed to carry a different tone than the tense questioning from earlier in the day. "Given the information presented," he said, "the Quran Assembly recommends a formal, if cautious, acknowledgement of humanity's expanded standing within this region. We do not extend this recognition lightly, nor without continued observation of future actions. However, the events described today, along with the manner in which humanity has conducted itself throughout this meeting, suggest a level of restraint that we believe merits a careful reconsideration of prior assumptions." It was not an enthusiastic welcome, nor an apology for years of being overlooked, but it was something, a quiet, formal acknowledgement that the galaxy's understanding of humanity's place among the stars had permanently and irreversibly changed. Laura accepted the statement graciously, without any hint of triumph in her voice, and the meeting slowly moved toward its conclusion, with smaller working groups scheduled to continue discussions over the following weeks regarding trade agreements, security arrangements, and future communication between our government and the wider galactic community. As we prepared to leave Meridian Junction later that evening, Vela walked with me toward the departure platform, her expression thoughtful and somewhat distant. "Do you believe they trust us now?" I asked her honestly. "Not entirely," she said. "Trust like that does not form in a single afternoon, no matter how honest the conversation. But I believe something more important has happened today. They have stopped underestimating you. That, in many ways, matters far more than trust alone." I thought about her words during the long journey back toward human space, staring out at the endless stretch of stars beyond the viewport, wondering what this shift in perception would ultimately mean for the future. Humanity had spent so long being viewed as small and unimportant, a young species still finding its footing among far older and more powerful civilizations. Now, in the span of a single event, that perception had been permanently altered, replaced by something far more complicated, a mixture of caution, curiosity, and quiet reassessment that would likely shape our relationship with the rest of the galaxy for generations to come. I did not yet know how the wider galactic councils would respond to what had happened, or how the smaller powers who had spent decades relying on humanity's perceived weakness for their own strategic advantage would react to this sudden and dramatic shift. But as our transport ship pulled away from Meridian Junction and began its long journey home, I understood, perhaps for the first time, that the events at Border Platform 6 had not simply been an isolated encounter. They had been the opening moment of an entirely new chapter, one the rest of the galaxy was only just beginning to read. 2 weeks after the meeting at Meridian Junction, I was reassigned temporarily to Earth Defense Command Headquarters, a request that came directly from Laura Bishop herself. She told me she wanted someone present during the upcoming councils who understood the situation from a ground-level perspective, someone who had lived through the actual encounter rather than simply reading about it in a report. I arrived at the Central Command Complex on Earth on a quiet morning, the kind of ordinary day that felt strange given everything happening around it. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Officials moved briskly through hallways, carrying datapads filled with updates from dozens of diplomatic channels that had opened almost overnight following the events at the border. Grace had traveled ahead of me and met me just inside the entrance, her expression tired but focused. "It has been like this every day since the meeting," she said. "Every government in this part of the galaxy suddenly wants to speak directly with us." "That sounds like a good thing," I said. "It is, mostly," she replied. "But it is also exhausting. Every conversation requires careful balance. We need to appear confident without seeming threatening, open without seeming naive. It is a very narrow path to walk." I followed her toward one of the main briefing rooms, where a wide holographic display showed a live feed from an ongoing session of the Regional Stability Council, a rotating body made up of representatives from various species who met periodically to discuss matters affecting the broader region. Today's session, unusually, was almost entirely focused on humanity. I watched as a delegate from a species called the Stori, known for their historically cautious approach to diplomacy, addressed the council with visible unease. "We must consider," the Stori delegate said, "that a species capable of hiding fleets of this magnitude for decades may also be capable of hiding far more than we currently understand. What guarantee do we have that what was revealed at the border represents the full extent of their capability?" Another delegate, this one from a species I did not recognize, responded with equal concern. "And even if their stated intentions remain purely defensive, intentions can change. Power of this scale, once revealed, cannot simply be forgotten or dismissed. We must adjust our strategic planning accordingly, regardless of how peaceful their recent conduct may appear." Grace watched the exchange with a tired but patient expression. "This is the same conversation happening in different rooms all across the galaxy right now," she said. "Fear rarely settles quickly, even when the actions causing it were entirely defensive in nature." I understood her point, but watching representatives debate humanity's potential threat level as though we were some unpredictable force of nature, rather than people simply trying to protect our own home, left me with an uncomfortable feeling I could not quite shake. It was strange, hearing entire species discuss my own people with such wary uncertainty, as though we had suddenly become something unfamiliar and difficult to categorize. Later that day, Laura called me into a smaller meeting room, where she was preparing for a private conversation with a representative from the Farron government, arranged as a follow-up to the earlier discussions at Meridian Junction. To my surprise, the representative turned out to be Vela herself, appearing through a secure holographic connection from a Farron diplomatic outpost several systems away. "It is good to see you again," Vela said, her image flickering slightly before stabilizing. "Though I imagine the past 2 weeks have been considerably busier for both of you than either of us anticipated." "That is one way to describe it," Laura said, offering a small, tired smile. Vela's expression grew more serious as she continued. "I bring both good news and difficult news," she said. "The Farron government has formally agreed to expand diplomatic and trade relations with humanity, based largely on the restraint demonstrated during and after the encounter. However, not all species view the situation as favorably." "The Kael'thir Dominion," Laura said quietly, already anticipating what Vela was about to say. Vela nodded. "Their government has remained completely silent since the encounter, refusing all attempts at communication from neutral parties, including our own. Some analysts believe they are simply reassessing their position before responding. Others fear their silence may indicate preparation for a different kind of response entirely." I felt a small knot form in my stomach at those words. The idea that a species capable of maintaining 6 centuries of unbroken conquest might now be quietly preparing some kind of retaliation, rather than simply accepting a single unexpected loss, was not a comforting thought. "Do you believe they intend further conflict?" Laura asked carefully. "I do not know," Vela admitted. "Their culture places enormous value on strength and reputation. Losing an entire fleet without inflicting any losses in return is not simply a military setback for them. It is a significant blow to their standing among other powerful species who have long respected and feared their historical dominance. How they choose to respond to that kind of loss may depend heavily on internal political pressures we do not fully understand from the outside." Laura sat quietly for a moment, considering Vela's words carefully before responding. "We have no interest in further conflict with the Kael'thir Dominion," she said. "But we will not hesitate to defend ourselves again if it becomes necessary." "I understand," Vela said. "And for what it is worth, I believe your continued restraint following the encounter has done more to stabilize this situation than any show of additional strength ever could have. Many species who initially feared humanity's capabilities have instead found themselves reassessing their fear, as your people have consistently chosen calm, measured responses over any form of escalation." After Vela's connection ended, Laura turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You have been quiet through most of this," she said. "What are you thinking?" I considered my answer carefully before speaking. "I am thinking that everyone keeps asking what else we might be hiding," I said. "And I do not think that question is going away anytime soon, no matter how honest or restrained we continue to be." Laura nodded slowly. "You are right," she said. "And I do not think we should try too hard to make it go away. Some uncertainty may actually serve us well in the coming months. It encourages caution rather than aggression, at least among those species wise enough to recognize the value of patience." Over the following days, I attended several more council sessions alongside Grace and Laura, listening as various governments slowly worked through their own internal debates about how to approach this newly revealed version of humanity. Some species pushed for immediate formal alliances, eager to secure favorable relations before other powers could do the same. Others remained deeply cautious, unwilling to commit to any long-term arrangement until they better understood the full scope of what humanity was truly capable of. Throughout all of it, one thing remained consistent. No formal request for information about the fleet's origin, size, or technological basis was ever answered with specific details. Every question of that nature was met with the same calm, unwavering response from every human representative involved. "We built what we needed to protect our people. Nothing more needs to be understood beyond that." It was a simple answer, repeated so consistently across so many different conversations that it began to feel less like evasion and more like a quiet, deliberate statement of principle. Humanity was not interested in explaining itself further, nor in proving anything beyond what had already been demonstrated. We had acted to protect what was ours, and we intended to continue doing exactly that, regardless of how much curiosity or concern it generated among the wider galactic community. Near the end of my time at Earth Defense Command, I found myself standing beside Grace in a quiet observation lounge overlooking the planet below, watching the slow rotation of clouds across familiar continents I had grown up knowing my entire life. "Do you think this changes us?" I asked her. "As a people, I mean. Now that everyone knows what we are truly capable of." Grace considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I think it changes how others see us," she said. "Whether it changes who we actually are depends entirely on what we choose to do next. Power like this can shape a people in very different directions, depending on how carefully it is handled." "And which direction do you think we will choose?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment longer, watching the earth slowly turn beneath us. "I think," she said finally, "we will choose the same direction we always intended to. Quiet strength, used only when necessary, and otherwise kept carefully out of sight. The galaxy may know what we are capable of now, but I do not believe that changes our purpose. It simply changes how carefully we now need to walk while carrying that knowledge with us." I thought about her words for a long time after our conversation ended, watching the stars slowly emerge as the observation lounge shifted into its evening cycle. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and for the first time in our history among the stars, there had been no argument, no counterattack, and no meaningful response from anyone who might once have considered challenging us. The silence that followed our strike had said more than any words ever could, and I was beginning to understand that this silence, more than the fleet itself, might end up being the most significant part of this entire story. 6 months passed before I finally returned to Border Platform 6, the same station where everything had first begun. The station itself looked almost exactly as I remembered it, quiet and steady against the endless backdrop of stars, though everything surrounding it had changed in ways I was still trying to fully understand. Grace remained in command, though she had been offered several promotions during the months following the encounter, each of which she quietly declined. When I asked her why, she simply told me she preferred staying close to the border, close to the place where she felt she could still make a direct difference, rather than becoming another voice, lost among endless committees and councils. The hidden fleet, the one that had appeared so suddenly and vanished just as quietly afterward, had returned to wherever it had come from, its presence no longer visible on any sensor readout, its exact numbers and capabilities still officially unconfirmed by any government report. Rumors continued to circulate, of course, some claiming the fleet had simply returned to hidden bases along the border, others suggesting it had dispersed entirely, ready to reassemble again the moment it was ever needed. No official statement ever confirmed or denied any of these theories, and I suspected none ever would. What surprised me most, in the months following the encounter, was how quickly the wider galaxy seemed to settle back into a version of normal, even as the underlying balance of power had shifted so dramatically beneath the surface. Trade continued. Diplomatic relations expanded cautiously but steadily. Smaller species who had once viewed humanity as an unimportant, easily overlooked presence in galactic affairs, now approached us with a level of careful respect that would have seemed impossible only a year earlier. The Kael'thir Dominion, true to Vela's earlier concerns, remained largely silent throughout this entire period, offering no formal apology, no explanation, and no further aggression toward human territory. Some analysts within Earth Defense Command believed their silence stemmed from internal political turmoil following such a significant and public loss. Others believed the Dominion was simply choosing patience, waiting for a future opportunity to reassess the situation from a position of greater strength. Either way, the border remained quiet, and for now, that quiet was enough. Vela visited the station once more during this period, this time not as part of any formal diplomatic mission, but simply as someone who had, over the course of the past several months, become something close to a friend. We sat together in the station's small observation deck, watching the stars slowly shift as the platform continued its steady orbit. "You seem different," she observed, studying me carefully. "Calmer, perhaps. More settled than when we first met." "A lot has happened since then," I said. "It has," she agreed. "And yet, despite everything, your people have chosen to simply return to quiet routine, as though none of it ever occurred. I find that choice more remarkable than the fleet itself." "What do you mean?" I asked. She considered her words carefully before continuing. "Most species, upon revealing power of that magnitude, would seek to expand their influence, while the rest of the galaxy remained uncertain and cautious. Instead, humanity withdrew almost entirely back into its previous borders, offering no further demonstration, no additional claims, no attempt to leverage the fear your actions created into any form of expanded advantage." I thought about her observation for a long moment before responding. "I think that is exactly the point," I said finally. "We never wanted to be feared for the sake of being feared. We simply wanted to be left alone, to be safe within our own space, without needing to constantly prove our strength to anyone else. Now that the galaxy understands what we are capable of, we do not need to demonstrate it again, unless we are forced to." Vela nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That restraint," she said, "may end up being the most unsettling part of this entire situation for many species across the galaxy. A power that seeks nothing beyond its own safety is far more difficult to predict, and in some ways far more concerning, than a power driven by clear ambition. Ambition can be reasoned with, negotiated against, planned for. Quiet restraint offers no such certainty." I understood what she meant, even if I had never quite thought of our own actions in those terms before. Humanity had spent decades hiding an enormous, carefully prepared fleet, using it only once, briefly and decisively, before quietly withdrawing back into the same patient silence that had defined us for so long beforehand. To the rest of the galaxy, that kind of behavior likely appeared far stranger and more difficult to categorize than open aggression ever could have. Later that evening, after Vela's departure, I found myself standing alone in the same control room where everything had first begun, staring out at the quiet stretch of space beyond the viewport. Oliver had been promoted since the encounter, taking on additional responsibilities within the station's expanded defense systems, while Nathan continued working steadily in engineering, still occasionally muttering about how none of what had happened made any logical sense to him. I thought about the letter I had never finished writing to Claire Doyle and smiled slightly, realizing I finally had the courage, and perhaps the perspective, to finish it properly. Some things, it seemed, mattered just as much after everything had changed as they had before. Grace found me there a short while later, standing quietly by the viewport, and joined me, without saying anything at first, the two of us simply watching the stars together in comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder," I asked eventually, "what would have happened if the fleet had never appeared that day? If we had simply been left to face those 17 ships alone?" Grace considered the question carefully before answering. "I try not to dwell on it too much," she said. "What matters now is not what could have happened, but what we choose to do with what actually did happen. The galaxy knows what we are capable of now. The real question is, what kind of people we choose to be, going forward, with that knowledge now fully out in the open." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind her words. Humanity had spent so long preparing quietly in the shadows, building strength we hoped we would never actually need to use, all in the name of protecting a peace we valued, far more than any desire for recognition or power. Now that the rest of the galaxy finally understood the full extent of what we had been hiding, the greatest challenge facing us was no longer building that strength, but learning how to carry it responsibly, without losing the very values that had led us to build it so carefully in the first place. As the months continued to pass, life along the border slowly settled into a new kind of normal, one shaped permanently by the events that had unfolded that day. Trade expanded. Diplomatic relations deepened cautiously. The wider galaxy continued to watch humanity carefully, still uncertain exactly how far our capabilities truly extended, still unsure what other secrets we might still be quietly holding in reserve. We never offered any further explanation. We never confirmed the true size of the hidden fleet, nor the full extent of the technology that had allowed it to remain undetected for so many years. Every question asked about it was met with the same calm, consistent response we had given from the very beginning. We built what we needed to protect our people. Nothing more needs to be understood beyond that. And perhaps that quiet, unwavering silence, more than the fleet itself, was exactly the point all along. A galaxy that had once viewed humanity as small, predictable, and easily understood, now found itself facing a species capable of remarkable strength, yet choosing, again and again, to answer every question about that strength with nothing more than careful, patient quiet. Some nights, standing alone in the same control room where everything had first begun, I found myself wondering just how many other quiet secrets our own leaders might still be carefully holding in reserve, waiting patiently for a future moment when revealing them might once again become necessary. I never found an answer to that question, and somewhere deep down, I began to suspect that perhaps I never truly needed one. Some questions, I was slowly learning, were simply better left quietly unanswered, resting patiently in the same careful silence that had protected us all along. The stars continued their slow, steady turn beyond the viewport, quiet and endless, exactly as they always had been, and for the first time in a very long while, standing there watching them drift silently past, I finally allowed myself to feel something close to peace.